In the first half of 2026, one chip company raised its prices 3 times in 6 months, and the entire analog chip market shuddered. It doesn't make CPUs, it doesn't make GPUs, it doesn't make phone chips, but inside your car, your charger, factory machines, even data center power supplies, its chips are everywhere. A modern car can carry hundreds of them. It's called Texas Instruments, TI for short. And here's the best part. The company that changed the entire electronics industry started out hunting for oil. This is the story of how a seismic survey crew became the evergreen giant of the chip industry and casually invented the integrated circuit along the way, Nobel Prize included. Our story begins in 1930 in Texas. Back then, finding oil meant reading the landscape and gambling. A physicist named Karcher and a businessman named McDermott had a new trick. Set off small explosions at the surface, let the sound waves travel underground and bounce off the rock layers, record the echoes, and you can draw a map of what's below, where the oil might be hiding at a glance. The technique is called reflection seismography. Their company, Geophysical Service Incorporated, GSI, basically ultrasound scans for planet Earth. Business was good, but what sealed the company's fate was a purchase with absurd timing. On December 6, 1941, McDermott and 3 colleagues bought GSI. Remember that date because the next morning, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. They signed the papers. The next day, the world changed. Sounds like they bought at the worst possible moment, right? Quite the opposite. The same physics GSI used to find oil could find something else: submarines. Military contracts followed, magnetic anomaly detectors mounted on aircraft, hunting German U-boats beneath the waves. Then sonar, then radar, then military electronics of every kind. By the end of the war, the electronics business had outgrown the oil business. In 1951, the company decided it needed a new name. Their first choice, General Instruments, turned out that name was taken. So they reached for home and became Texas Instruments, one of the biggest names in electronics history, chosen as a backup. In 1947, Bell Labs invented the transistor. Everyone knew it would eventually replace the big, hot vacuum tube. Few companies dared to bet on it. In early 1952, TI paid $25,000 for a license to manufacture transistors from Western Electric. For a mid-sized company fresh out of the oil business, this was a gamble. They also poached a materials expert from Bell Labs, Gordon Teal. Transistors back then were made of germanium. Fatal weakness, heat. Warm them up and they quit. The military hated that. Teal's bet was silicon, heat-proof and made from sand. On April 14, 1954, TI built the world's first commercial silicon transistor. A month later, at an industry conference, came one of the great moments in chip history. Speaker after speaker said the same thing. Silicon transistors are years away. Then Teal stood up and said calmly, "Contrary to what my colleagues have told you about the bleak prospects, I happen to have a few of them here in my pocket." And he'd brought a brutal little demo, a record player running through germanium transistors, music playing, dunk the germanium into hot oil at 100 degrees. The music dies. Swap in silicon, dunk it in the same oil. The music never misses a note. They say people ran for the phones to place orders before he left the stage. That October, TI pulled off one more thing. With a small partner firm, the world's first transistor radio, the Regency TR1. $49.95, not cheap, over $500 in today's dollars. But it slid into a shirt pocket. For the first time, music could follow you. Over 100,000 sold. TI had kicked open the door to consumer electronics. Now it's the summer of 1958. The electronics industry had hit a wall. Too many components. Circuits kept growing more complex, tens of thousands of parts, hundreds of thousands of solder joints, all by hand. One bad joint and the whole machine goes dark. That May, a 34-year-old engineer joined TI, Jack Kilby. In July, the entire company went on summer vacation, a TI tradition. But Kilby was new. He hadn't earned any vacation days, so the vast laboratory emptied out, except for him. No meetings, no bosses, no deadlines. Just one question turning over in his head: why do resistors, capacitors, and transistors have to be separate parts at all? They can all be made from a semiconductor. What if they simply grew on the same piece of material? Nothing to solder. On July 24th, he wrote the idea in his lab notebook. On September 12th, his colleagues gathered around his bench. On it, a sliver of germanium, 11 millimeters long, waxed to a glass slide, a few crooked gold wires sticking out, ugly as a schoolcraft project. Power on, and a clean sine wave leapt across the oscilloscope. The world's first integrated circuit worked. Half a year later, Robert Noyce at Fairchild invented the planar process, which solved mass production. The two companies fought over patents for a decade, then shook hands and cross-licensed everything. Today we say it plainly: Kilby invented the first integrated circuit. Noyce made it manufacturable. In 2000, the Nobel Prize in Physics went to Jack Kilby. Noyce had died 10 years earlier, forever missing that honor. Kilby said, "If Robert were alive, there's no doubt we would have shared this prize." Here's the thing about the early integrated circuit: nobody bought it. Too expensive. Only the military and NASA could afford it. TI's boss, Pat Haggerty, knew they needed something ordinary people would buy. In 1965, on a business flight, Haggerty gave Kilby a challenge: use your chips to build a calculator that fits in a pocket. Keep in mind, calculators then were typewriter-sized and cost more than a car. 2 years later, a prototype, codenamed Caltech. £3. It could only add, subtract, multiply, divide. But it fit in a hand. In 1972, TI's own mass-market calculator, the Datamath, hit stores at about $150. Then the price avalanche. Within a few years, under $30. The calculator went from luxury item to stationary. And one more thing, the TI-84 graphing calculator American students still carry has ruled classrooms for over 2 decades. Standard issue for the SAT, a living fossil of consumer electronics. But that's another story. In 1978, TI released a magical toy, the Speak and Spell. Type a word, and it speaks the spelling out loud in a robot voice. Inside was the world's first single-chip speech synthesizer, the first time humanity put talking onto one piece of silicon. 4 years later, in Spielberg's E.T., the alien tears apart a Speak and Spell to phone home. Probably the most famous movie cameo in chip history. Consumer electronics kept paying off, so TI went bigger: home computers. The TI-99-4A, the world's first 16-bit home computer. It sold like crazy. By late 1982, the factory was shipping 5,000 units a day. But then they ran into a killer, Commodore's Jack Tramiel, a concentration camp survivor with one business creed: business is war. He kept slashing the price of his own machine. By April 1983, the VC-20 was down to $99, less than it cost TI to build theirs. TI gritted its teeth and followed. Price cuts, then a $100 rebate. Every unit sold was a unit sold at a loss. Third quarter of 1983, a $330 million loss. One quarter, in October, management pulled the plug. Total retreat from home computers. The bloodiest defeat in TI's history. But the lesson they dragged out of the wreckage was worth the tuition. In a price war consumer market, a technology lead will not save you. In 1983, the very year home computers collapsed, another seed quietly sprouted. TI released the TMS-32010, a digital signal processor, a DSP. Think of a DSP as a savant, useless at everything except signal math, at which it is terrifyingly fast. $500 each, it sold about 1,000 units the first year. Then the 90s arrived, and with them, mobile phones. A phone has to compress, encode, and transmit your voice in real time, which is exactly what a DSP does best. Nokia became TI's biggest customer. Inside the global phone boom, TI chips were everywhere. Focus was working, so in the late 90s, TI operated on itself. In 1997, the defense electronics business, half a century old, sold to Raytheon for $2.95 billion. The next year, the money-losing memory business went to Micron. The company that once made everything kept exactly two things: DSP and analog. There's a hidden side quest in these years too. An engineer named Larry Hornbeck had been working on micro mirrors since the 70s. In 1987, he invented the DMD, millions of microscopic mirrors on a chip the size of a thumbnail. The technology became DLP. In 1999, Star Wars Episode I premiered on it, cinema's first digital projection. Today, more than 8 out of 10 digital movie screens run on that chip. In 2015, Hornbeck walked away with an Academy Award, a chip engineer with an Oscar. Then came smartphones. TI's OMAP processors were riding high. Nokia and Motorola were loyal customers. But Apple and Samsung started designing their own chips, and Qualcomm swept the market with its baseband patents. September 2012, TI announced it was leaving the smartphone chip business. November, 1,700 layoffs. The internet said TI had just given up on the future. In hindsight, it was the second time they cut off an arm at exactly the right moment, stepping out of the smartphone meat grinder and pushing every chip they had onto a bet nobody found sexy: analog. So what is an analog chip? The real world is analog. Sound, temperature, pressure, light, continuous signals. Processors only understand ones and zeros. Analog chips are the translators between the two worlds. They translate reality into something digital minds can read. And as a business, it's beautiful. TI sells 80,000 different products. A single chip can sell for 20 years. Unit price, sometimes pennies. Margins, enormous. 100,000 customers, factories, car makers, power companies. Not one of them big enough to squeeze TI. In 2025, TI's analog business brought in $14 billion. 95% of company revenue comes from analog and embedded chips. 3/4 of it from industrial, automotive, and data centers. And in the AI era, what do data centers crave most? Power. Managing power is analog's home turf. In February 2026, TI announced a $7.5 billion acquisition of Silicon Labs to complete its wireless map. 3 price hikes in 6 months rattled the entire industry. The little company that hunted oil in the Texas dust 96 years ago still holds one of the deepest moats in electronics. Look back at TI's 96 years and you'll count 4 transformations. From hunting oil to building for war. From betting on the transistor to inventing the integrated circuit. From the peak of consumer electronics and its bloodiest crash to focusing down and becoming today's king of analog. Twice, this company amputated its own biggest business. Both times it was mocked. Both times it came back stronger. In 2000, standing on the Nobel stage, Jack Kilby told a joke. A beaver and a rabbit are staring up at the Hoover Dam. And the beaver says, "No, I didn't build it myself, but it's based on an idea of mine." That empty laboratory in the summer of 1958 and that ugly little sliver of germanium, they are the idea behind every chip you own. Next episode, the other father of the integrated circuit, Robert Noyce, and Silicon Valley's creation myth, Fairchild and the Traitorous 8. See you next time.